like bullets. You're standing in your own kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, thinking about nothing more dramatic than whether you bought enough garlic, and then your husband looks at you and says, "You're replaceable." Just like that. No anger, no build-up, just a casual observation delivered between the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of water boiling on the stove. And suddenly, the entire foundation of your life cracks open, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it. Like your worth was always this negotiable, this conditional, this utterly disposable. Hey Race, what nobody tells you about emotional abuse in marriage: it doesn't always look like abuse. There are no bruises to photograph, no broken furniture to document, no witnesses to validate what happened. Just you and the person who promised to love you, standing in a kitchen that suddenly feels like a courtroom where you've already been convicted. The controlling husband doesn't need to raise his voice. He's perfected the art of dismantling your self-worth with the same tone head used to discuss the weather. And the worst part? You've probably been accepting this treatment for so long that you've started believing his version of reality. That you're too sensitive. That he's just being honest. That maybe, somewhere deep down, you really are as replaceable as he says. But what if I told you that you're replaceable is the biggest lie a toxic marriage produces? What if the man who says it is actually the one who's terrified that you'll wake up one day and realize you're not trapped, you're just convinced you are? This is the story of a woman who heard those words in her kitchen and made a decision that changed everything. Not through tears or confrontation or trying one more time to prove her value to someone invested in denying it. No, she did something he never saw coming. She replaced his power with something he couldn't manipulate, couldn't gaslight, couldn't talk his way out of a lawyer. And what happened next is the kind of silent revenge that doesn't just end a marriage, it rewrites the entire narrative of who had control all along. If you've ever felt small in your own home, if you've ever questioned your worth because someone who's supposed to love you keeps chipping away at it, if you've ever wondered whether you're overreacting or if what you're experiencing is actually emotional manipulation, this story is for you. Because the path from you're replaceable to here are the divorce papers isn't about drama or vindication. It's about recognizing the pattern, refusing to negotiate your humanity, and understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop playing a game you never agreed to in the first place. Let's talk about what happens when silence becomes strategy, when legal structure replaces emotional chaos, and when a woman decides that being replaceable works both ways. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and butter, the kind of warmth that makes you forget the world outside exists. She was chopping vegetables for dinner, humming something she couldn't name, when he walked in and leaned against the counter. It was one of those moments that felt safe, domestic, even tender. She glanced up, expecting maybe a compliment on the smell, or a joke about how he'd burn water if left alone. Instead, his eyes held something colder, something she'd seen before but always tried to ignore. He didn't raise his voice. That's the thing about emotional manipulation in marriage, it doesn't need volume. He spoke evenly, almost casually, like he was commenting on the weather. You know you're replaceable, right? The words landed soft but sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. She froze mid-chop, the blade hovering above the cutting board. Her heart didn't race, it sank. Because this wasn't new. This was the toxic marriage story she'd been living, just in a different chapter. And in that quiet domestic setting, with no one else around to witness it, the cruelty felt even more deliberate. She didn't argue. She didn't ask him to explain or take it back. Women in controlling husband situations learn early that defending yourself only gives him more ammunition. So she nodded, set the knife down carefully, and went back to stirring the pot on the stove. Her silence wasn't agreement, it was survival. But something shifted in that moment, something he didn't notice because he was already walking away, satisfied that his point had landed. Had wanted her to feel small, and in his mind, mission accomplished. What he didn't realize was that she'd stopped trying to prove her worth to someone who used it as a weapon. That kitchen argument abuse wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no broken dishes, no slammed doors. Just a woman standing at the stove, realizing that the person she'd married had been chipping away at her foundation for years. And for the first time, instead of crumbling, she started planning. Not revenge in the explosive sense, nothing that would give him another reason to call her emotional or irrational. No, this would be different. This would be the kind of silent revenge marriage stories are made of, the kind where you don't fight fire with fire. You call a lawyer instead. The worst part about emotional abuse isn't the screaming, it's the calm. It's when someone looks you in the eye and tells you something devastating like they're doing you a favor. He had this way of framing cruelty as clarity, of making you feel like the problem wasn't what he said, but that you couldn't handle the truth. That night in the kitchen, when he told her she was replaceable, he didn't flinch. He didn't apologize or soften it with a joke. He just stood there, arms crossed, like a teacher correcting a student who'd gotten the answer wrong. And that's exactly how he wanted her to feel, like she needed the lesson. This is textbook emotional manipulation marriage tactics. Controlling husbands don't always shout or threaten. Sometimes they speak in measured tones, using words like honestly and realistically to disguise the fact that they're tearing you down. Had done it before, told her she was too sensitive when she cried, too dramatic when she got upset, too much when she asked for basic respect. And now, replaceable. As if reducing her worth to a job listing was somehow helpful. As if she should thank him for the reminder that in his eyes, she was nothing more than a role anyone could fill. She'd spent years trying to prove him wrong, trying to be indispensable. She cooked his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, supported his career, swallowed her own dreams to make room for his. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. Because that's the point of this kind of toxic marriage story. The goal isn't improvement, it's control. As long as she believed she was replaceable, she'd keep trying harder, keep shrinking herself, keep accepting less. He'd framed it as honesty, but it was really a leash. And she'd been wearing it for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. But something happens when you hear the same lie enough times. Eventually, you start to see it for what it is. Standing at that stove, she realized he wasn't being honest, was being strategic. He needed her to believe she had no value, because the moment she recognized her worth, his power would evaporate. Men who say you're replaceable are usually the ones terrified of being left. They build cages out of words and call it love. And she'd just realized she'd been handed the key years ago. She just hadn't known where the lock was. Until now. There's a special kind of pain that comes from being degraded in private. When abuse happens behind closed doors, there are no witnesses to validate your experience, no one to say, that was wrong. It's just you and the person who's supposed to love you, and the echo of words that cut deeper than any public insult ever could. She stood there in that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of dinner and the soft hum of the refrigerator, feeling like she'd been slapped. But there was no mark, no bruise, nothing she could point to and say, look what he did. Just the hollow ache of knowing that in his mind, she didn't matter enough to warrant basic human decency. This is the reality of emotional abuse in controlling husband dynamics. It thrives in isolation. He didn't need an audience. In fact, he preferred it this way. Public humiliation leaves evidence, creates witnesses, forces accountability. But this quiet dismantling of her self-worth in their kitchen. This was efficient. Clean. Deniable. If she tried to tell anyone, he could laugh it off, say she was overreacting, twist it into a joke she didn't get. I was just being honest, he'd say, shrugging like she was the unreasonable one for having feelings. And people would nod, because emotional manipulation marriage tactics are invisible to those who've never experienced them. She felt the weight of every time he'd done this before, every casual insult disguised as observation, every dismissal of her emotions, every moment had made her feel like her pain was an inconvenience. The toxic marriage story she was living didn't involve broken furniture or police reports. It was subtler than that, more insidious. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small cruelties, each one designed to make her believe she deserved less than she did. He attacked her value directly, reduced her to a function, stripped away her humanity, and expected her to smile and serve dinner afterward. That's what submission looks like in these relationships, not dramatic surrender, but quiet erosion. But hey race, what he didn't anticipate: humiliation only works when the victim internalizes it. When you accept the shame, you carry it. When you reject it, it falls flat. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging him to take it back or explaining why he was wrong. She just stood there, wooden spoon in hand, letting his words hang in the air like smoke that would eventually clear. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was refusal. She refused to perform the role he'd written for her, the one where she crumbled and he got to play savior. Instead, she filed the moment away, adding it to a mental list she didn't even know she had been keeping. And that list was about to become evidence. He walked away expecting tears. Maybe an argument. At the very least, some visible crack in her composure that would confirm his power over her emotional state. Controlling husbands thrive on reaction, it's the fuel that keeps the cycle going. When you cry, they know they've landed the blow. When you argue, they get to call you irrational. When you beg them to be kinder, they've won because you've admitted you need something from them. Head calibrated that irreplaceable comment perfectly, delivered it with just enough casual cruelty to hurt without seeming intentional. And now he was waiting for the payoff, that moment when she'd come to him seeking reassurance, proving once again that he held all the cards. But she didn't follow the script. She finished chopping the vegetables. She stirred the sauce. She set the table like nothing had happened, her movements calm and deliberate. When dinner was ready, she called him to eat with the same neutral tone she'd used to mention the weather. He sat down, glancing at her occasionally, trying to read her face for signs of damage. Was she angry? Hurt? Planning something? He couldn't tell, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. In all their years of this toxic marriage story, she'd always reacted. Always given him something to work with, some emotion he could manipulate or dismiss. This blank slate confused him. What he didn't understand was that emotional disengagement is a superpower. When you stop feeding the machine, it starts to sputter. She wasn't playing dead or giving him the silent treatment in some passive-aggressive power move. She'd genuinely stepped back, like an anthropologist observing a subject rather than a wife absorbing abuse. She watched him eat, noticed how he kept glancing at her, saw the slight furrow in his brow when she didn't perform her usual role. The kitchen argument abuse had initiated had failed to produce the expected result, and he didn't have a backup plan. Men like him rarely do. They're so used to emotional manipulation, marriage working like clockwork, that they panic when the gears stop turning. She slept in the guest room that night without announcement or explanation. Just picked up her pillow and walked down the hall like it was the most natural thing in the world. He called after her, "Where are you going?" His voice carrying a note of confusion that bordered on offense. She didn't answer. Didn't justify or defend or negotiate. Just closed the door and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: clarity. The silent revenge marriage brewing in her mind wasn't about hurting him. It was about removing herself from a game she'd never agreed to play. And the first move in that chess match was refusing to react. Because when you stop giving a controlling husband your emotions, you stop giving him ammunition. And without ammunition, he's just a man shouting at walls. There's a moment in every toxic marriage story when the fog lifts and you see the pattern for what it is. Not an isolated incident. Not a bad day or a miscommunication. But a deliberate, repeating cycle designed to keep you small. She lay in that guest room bed, counting the ceiling tiles like rosary beads, and realized this wasn't the first time he'd devalued her. It was just the most explicit. There was the time he'd laughed at her business idea in front of friends, framing it as a joke while gutting her confidence. The countless occasions he'd interrupted her mid-sentence to correct some minor detail, establishing himself as the authority on her own experiences. The way he'd sigh heavily whenever she expressed a need, as if her humanity was an inconvenience he had to tolerate. Recognition hit her like cold water. Every instance of emotional abuse, every calculated comment, every dismissal, they all served the same purpose. Control. He didn't say you're replaceable because he believed it. He said it because he needed her to believe it. As long as she thought her value was conditional, she'd keep performing for his approval. She'd keep shrinking, accommodating, sacrificing. She'd remain manageable. The emotional manipulation marriage she'd been living wasn't about love gone wrong, it was about power maintained through psychological warfare. And the moment you understand that cruelty equals control, everything changes. You stop asking what did I do wrong? And start asking why does he need me to feel worthless? She didn't cry. She didn't rehearse confrontations in her head or plan dramatic speeches about respect and boundaries. Women who've lived with controlling husband behavior know that negotiating your worth is a losing game. You can't convince someone to value you when your lack of value serves their interests. It's like asking a prison guard to unlock your cell because you've been really good. The cage isn't there because you misbehaved, it's there because someone benefits from your confinement. So she made a different choice, one that bypassed his participation entirely. She decided to stop negotiating. Stop explaining. Stop trying to earn basic human decency from someone who withheld it as strategy. The shift from emotion to strategy felt like stepping out of quicksand onto solid ground. For years, she'd been reactive, responding to his provocations, defending herself against his accusations, trying to prove she wasn't the things he called her. Emotional. Irrational. Too sensitive. Replaceable. But strategy doesn't require his validation. Strategy is cold, clear, and utterly independent of his opinion. She lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, and started making a mental list. Not of grievances, those were endless and beside the point. But of logistics. Where the bank statements were kept. Which assets were in whose name. Whether their state was no-fault divorce or required cause. She didn't know all the answers yet, but she knew someone who would. And in the morning, she'd make the call that would shift the power off the kitchen table and into a lawyer's office, where your replaceable wouldn't mean a damn thing. She made the call on a Tuesday morning, sitting in her car in a grocery store parking lot where he'd never think to look for her. The lawyer's voice was professional, warm without being patronizing, and asked questions that made her realize how much documentation she'd need. Bank statements, tax returns, proof of assets, records of joint accounts. It felt surreal, translating years of emotional manipulation marriage into legal terminology. But there was also relief in a structure, a framework, a language that didn't require her to justify why being told you're replaceable wasn't acceptable behavior. The law didn't care about his tone or his intentions. It cared about division of assets, custody if applicable, and equitable dissolution. Cold. Clean. Fair. The lawyer consulted became her anchor in a way therapy never had. Not because therapy wasn't valuable, but because this toxic marriage story had gone past the point where healing could happen inside it. You can't fix a relationship where one person views the other as replaceable. The controlling husband dynamic doesn't respond to communication techniques or couples counseling, it responds to consequences. And filing for divorce was the consequence Head never anticipated. She gathered documents methodically, photocopying statements when he was at work, forwarding emails to a private account he didn't know existed. Every piece of paper was a brick in the wall she was building between his version of reality and actual reality. Legal structure replaced emotional chaos, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. The power shift happened the moment she signed the retainer agreement. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no cosmic alignment, just her signature on a dotted line in a beige office that smelled like coffee and old carpet. But everything changed. Because now there were rules he couldn't rewrite, processes he couldn't manipulate, a third party who couldn't be gaslit or intimidated. The kitchen table where Head so casually declared her replaceable. It no longer mattered. That arena was closed. The new arena had bailiffs and legal precedent and a judge who wouldn't care how calmly he delivered his cruelty. This was the silent revenge marriage move Head never seen coming, not because it was sneaky, but because Head genuinely believed she'd never leave. She went home that day and cooked dinner like always. Set the table. Asked about his day. He had no idea that control had been formally removed from his grasp, that the power Head wielded so carelessly was already evaporating. Men like him operate on the assumption that their partners will always be there, always absorb the abuse, always choose the devil they know over the uncertainty of freedom. Head called her replaceable, but Head never actually expected to have to replace her. And when the papers were served 3 weeks later handed to him by a process server while he was getting into his car after work, the look on his face was apparently priceless. The lawyer told her later that Head stood there for 5 minutes, just staring at the envelope. Like he couldn't comprehend that actions have consequences. That emotional abuse doesn't evaporate just because you don't leave bruises. That you're replaceable works both ways. The first call came 20 minutes after he was served. Then another. Then text messages that evolved from confused to angry to pleading in the span of an hour. What is this? You can't be serious. We need to talk about this like adults. The irony wasn't lost on her now. He wanted to talk like adults, after years of treating her like a subordinate employee he could fire at will. Controlling husbands always panic when the structure they've built to contain you suddenly has exit doors. Head spent so long convincing her she was replaceable that had forgotten to consider whether he was. And judging by the 17 missed calls lighting up her phone, the answer was making him deeply uncomfortable. When intimidation didn't work, he switched tactics. Suddenly he was the victim of her overreaction, her inability to take a joke, her emotional instability. I never said you were replaceable, he told her voicemail, rewriting history in real time. You're twisting my words. You always do this. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity, denying something Head said 3 weeks ago in their kitchen, as if she'd imagined the whole thing. This is what emotional manipulation marriage looks like when it's cornered. The abuser doesn't accept responsibility. They construct an alternate reality where they're the reasonable one and you're the crazy person who can't handle honesty. She deleted the messages without listening to most of them. His version of events didn't matter anymore. The court would deal in facts, not feelings. Then came the guilt. After everything I've done for you. I gave you a home, a life. This is how you repay me. As if marriage were a transaction where she owed him gratitude for basic provision. As if being fed and housed cancelled out years of being diminished. The toxic marriage story he was trying to sell, where he was the generous provider and she was the ungrateful wife, might have worked on his friends or family. But her lawyer had heard it all before. Every controlling husband thinks he's the exception, that his particular brand of emotional abuse was justified or misunderstood. They all believe that if they can just explain it correctly, everyone will see that their partner was the problem. But legal boundaries don't care about narrative. They care about division of assets and enforceable agreements. When guilt failed, threats emerged. Veiled at first, you'll regret this. You have no idea what you're doing. Then more explicit. Head make sure she got nothing. Head tell everyone what she was really like. Head fight her on every single point until she had nothing left. It was almost funny, watching dominance collapse in real time. For years, his power had come from her belief that she had no options, that leaving would destroy her, that she needed him more than he needed her. But the moment legal structure appeared, the moment a lawyer sat between his threats and her future, everything Head built turned to smoke. The irreplaceable emotional abuse that had kept her trapped only worked in isolation. Once Shed stepped into the light and said, "This is what happened, and I have documentation," his power evaporated. And watching him scramble to reclaim it was the most clarifying thing Shed experienced in years. Hey, race the truth they don't tell you about emotional manipulation marriage. The word replaceable is always a lie. It's not an observation, it's a trap. When someone tells you you're replaceable, what they're really saying is, I need you to believe you have no value so you won't realize I'm terrified of losing you. Because people who genuinely view their partners as replaceable don't bother saying it. They just leave. They replace. But controlling husbands don't leave, they dig in, they diminish, they create elaborate psychological structures designed to keep you from ever considering the door. You're replaceable is a cage built from words, and the moment you